Just a warning, this episode contains some graphic material that listeners may find confronting. Years ago, before she became the princess of the Ponzi, Melissa Caddick's friends were each chipping in $50 to buy a joint present for a friend. It was a Thermomix, one of those whiz-bang kitchen appliances. Now, all the friends handed over their $50, all except one.
Folks, no surprises for guessing who that one person might be. When they chased up Melissa for her contribution, she snapped, saying it must be a problem at their end because she had a receipt, a bank record of her transfer.
But if you looked closely, Melissa had deliberately left a number off the end of the account. So, Tom, she'd doctored the document and pretended to send her money.
I'm literally scratching my head here, Kate. What kind of person does that to their friends? Pretends to give $50. Well, that's right. It's the very kind of person who then goes on to steal millions of dollars from her mum, her dad, her brother, her cousins, her aunts, her uncles.
And, of course, her friends. Her oldest friend, Kate Horn, who did hand over her $50 for the joint present, was Melissa Caddick's first victim. Kate and members of her family would end up being financially crippled, like really left with absolutely nothing. Their life savings were stolen by Melissa so that she could enjoy a life of unbridled luxury.
We've spoken to Kate's mum, Anne, and quite frankly, the treachery of Melissa Caddick and the devastation that she's wreaked on this family is just so hard to put into words. It is heartbreaking.
To find yourself at the age of 78 with your entire life savings stolen by someone you thought was a friend, and on top of that, your own children can't come to your rescue because they've lost everything as well. I mean, this is Melissa Caddick's just cruel, cruel legacy.
We were financially secured and everything was gone overnight. Our future looks grim. I always wanted to be independent, always hoped I wouldn't be a burden to anybody, but it changed. I feel vulnerable. I know I'm a talking point. From when I walk in, I can feel they stop talking and, oh, here she is.
Welcome to episode 10 of Liar Liar, Melissa Caddick and the Missing Millions. I'm Tom Steinford, a reporter with 60 Minutes.
And I'm Kate McClymont, an investigative journalist at the Sydney Morning Herald. We are delving into one of the most extraordinary crimes of the century. Melissa Caddick, a seemingly successful Sydney businesswoman, turned out to be a sociopathic con artist who stole more than $23 million from clients, mainly family and friends, who thought their funds were being invested in shares.
Within hours of her home being raided by the corporate regulator, she disappeared.
And 3 months later, Melissa Caddick's foot washed up on a remote beach hundreds of kilometres away from her Sydney home.
Where is she? The millionaire is accused of stealing from friends to fund her lavish lifestyle.
She hasn't been in touch with her family. She hasn't been in touch with her friends.
This was a systematic and meticulous attempt to defraud investors.
4 or 5 million?
About $10 million.
You name it, Christian Dior, Chanel.
She was living off our money.
She is a survivor and she would have had a plan.
Nothing would surprise any of us.
You know how much we love you. You just come home, everything's taken care of, you're not in trouble.
Hi, it's Melissa Caddick.
Well, everyone, this is our season finale, and we are going to wrap up quite a few things here, including the fallout from this baffling case of Melissa Caddick and the Missing Millions, and I guess where it all goes from here.
We'll also examine the lifelong implications for her victims, as well as the fracturing of relationships within Caddick's own family.
First up, we're going to look at the professional people Melissa employed and why none of them noticed that their client was perpetrating one of the country's biggest frauds right under their noses. Specifically, what the hell were Melissa's auditors doing Did they drop the ball on this one?
Look, that's right, because Melissa Caddick ran her fraud for 8 years. So why did nobody pick up on any irregularities, both in her own company Malaver's accounts or in the accounts of her clients' self-managed super funds? After all, Caddick hired accountants and auditors to go over the books every year.
What's obvious is that Melissa used a range of people so that no one ever got a clear picture of her fraud, and she really made sure that she controlled the flow of information on all of this. Melissa also notably didn't hire people from the big end of town. Instead, she had this track record of choosing people that she hoped wouldn't be asking her too many questions about her books, like how she was writing off $200,000 a year in travel for tax purposes, or how she was claiming deductions on the $24,000 a year she said she spent on magazines and periodicals.
Her initial accountant, Cyril John Pearson, known as John, had previously been jailed for diddling the books. He was busted stealing millions from a super fund for hospitality workers. And as well as being banged up in the big house, he was also banned from managing a corporation for 10 years.
But once out of jail, Pearson was back on the tools and back into the books. I saw Pearson actually bragging in a corporate video that the art of tax planning is, quote, to divide, to defer, to delete, and to discount.
Tom, I think he left out another D word, deceive.
Good pick up, Kate. In 2015, when John Pearson was being sued over a commercial dispute, his solicitor was none other than Jennifer Williamson. If that name rings a bell, well, that's because Jennifer Williamson was also Melissa's solicitor. She was the one who drew up Melissa's will, which included that non-existent Aspen apartment that Melissa just invented out of thin air.
I don't know whether Melissa actually knew that Pearson was being sued, but she did have a falling out with him and she moved her business to another suburban Brisbane accountancy firm, LSI, whose two partners had previously worked for Pearson, although they weren't involved in any of his dodgy history or really any other wrongdoing for that matter. Their website says,
at LSI, we make accounting simple and easy for a fair but not over-the-top fee, as we do not have the overheads that many other accountants have.
Kate, it's easy to see why their overheads might not break the bank. The firm, let's be honest, it's not exactly high-end. This is run out of a suburban home in a residential street in Brisbane. It's the suburb of Hendra, which I think its only other claim to fame, Hendra, is the fact that the deadly Hendra equine virus was named after it.
I remember as soon as Melissa went missing, I rang her accountant, Nicholas Morales, who listed his previous experience on LinkedIn as doing the books at a local smash repairer. And I started off asking how it was that Melissa had a Queensland accountant. He went nuts, Tom, and demanded to know who my accountant was and that his clients were of no interest to anyone. I did retort, how many clients do you have who go missing?
Don't mess with Kate McClymont. The question does remain, though, why would Caddick use lawyers and accountants who are an 11-hour drive away in a completely different state? We've been told that the introduction to Jennifer Williamson came via Melissa's Brisbane-based cousin, who, as it turns out, also ended up losing money in the scam.
Now, there's no suggestion that any of these professionals were in cahoots with Caddick or that any of them have done anything wrong. It's more that Caddick pulled the wool over their eyes and prevented them from doing a thorough job. Bruce Gleeson, the court-appointed liquidator trying to recoup money for investors, explained this at his press conference in February 2021.
Ms Caddick maintained and controlled all information provided to external advisors to the company, herself and the investors. So what I mean by that is that she specifically, in our opinion, controlled who she wanted to give information to prepare financial statements and tax returns. And to that extent, she was insistent on maintaining such records in Excel.
Okay, so this is crucial, Kate. The use of Excel was central to Melissa's fraud. As one accountant explained it, Excel is basically this sort of blank canvas, and you can make it tell whatever story you want it to tell. More advanced programs that some people would be familiar with, like MYOB and Xero, they have inbuilt checks and balances.
In accountancy terms, Melissa's use of Excel is the equivalent of using an abacus instead of a calculator. With MYOB and Xero, you can't be creative because you have to reconcile the figures with external source documents. But with Excel, you put in what you like and you don't have to reconcile anything.
There's little doubt Excel was the tool of trade used to generate the fictitious investor statements and other financial records.
Look, as much as we might raise eyebrows as to how Caddick's astonishing works of fiction passed muster with the tax office, at the end of the day, the buck stopped with her. As chartered accountant Vicky Curran explains,
ultimately, when the client signs the lodgement form permitting their accountant or tax agent to lodge their tax return, they declare that, and this is word for word from the declaration form, all the information I have provided to the agent for the preparation of this document is true and correct.
This means the accountant can't be held responsible for the accuracy of the information they have used to prepare their client's tax return.
All right, this brings us to the advisors who are really in the gun on this one, and that's the various auditors of the self-managed super funds or the retirement funds that Caddick set up for her clients, appointing herself as a trustee.
Now, more than 1 million Australians manage their own super, and look, they'd know only too well the stress of finding share documents or digging up bank statements in order to prepare the annual returns to get an audit sign-off. A self-managed super fund must be audited annually, and the trustees must appoint an ASIC-approved auditor at least 45 days before their fund's annual return to the Australian Tax Office.
We've previously mentioned how organised and efficient Melissa Caddick was, so it was no doubt a relief for dozens of her investors to have Melissa handling all the paperwork to ensure their accounts were compliant. And it was a relief for Melissa as well, because it made it easier for her to concoct all of these false documents without anyone knowing any different. But as we know now, the paperwork she provided to the auditors were just complete fakes. Every single report, year in, year out, was a forgery.
So, did the auditors drop the ball? Chris Levy, an audit partner at Aquila Super, told the Australian Financial Review this.
It's pretty clear the auditors working on the self-managed super funds in this case did not do their job, and from what we know, some of these items should have been relatively easy to pick up.
Liquidator Bruce Gleeson has indicated he wants to pursue the auditors over their failures, and I know that one of the auditors Caddick used has already been banned by the Tax Practitioners Board.
Yeah, among the reasons that auditor was found not to be a fit and proper person was that he didn't have the compulsory professional indemnity insurance.
Bruce Gleeson is keen to pursue claims against the self-managed super fund auditors in order to claw back money for investors. And the corporate regulator ASIC is continuing to investigate the conduct of the other auditors. So we'll be watching that space.
Another question we've been pondering is whether Melissa Caddick ever planned or perhaps hoped to repay all the money she took from investors.
It seems that in the heart of every con artist, there's always that fervent belief that the jackpot is just around the corner. There's going to be one lucky roll of the dice, after which every one of your victims will be paid back. This is what forensic psychiatrist Olav Nielsen told us.
Well, if I get the big jackpot, I can pay everybody back and it'll all go away, but and that's a sort of fantasy that they exhibit.
You may recall that in the year before Caddick vanished in November 2020, in excess of $7 million flowed into her coffers. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic from March 2020, and because of the lockdowns, there wasn't exactly a lot to do with your money.
Yeah, keep in mind, Melissa was blowing $500,000 a year on overseas travel, and now because of border closures, well, that just wasn't an option.
And with the luxury boutiques closed, there also wasn't a lot of joy for Melissa at those high-end shops she so loved.
So Melissa had all of this money burning a hole in her pocket, and she decided this is it. One last roll of the dice, a high-stakes gamble. And what did she go for? cryptocurrency, as well as some mad plunges on the stock market. As liquidator Bruce Gleason notes, while Melissa liked to trumpet that she was some sort of financial whiz to her family and friends, the truth was that she was actually a terrible investor who racked up substantial losses.
The reality is that she lost several $1 million on the share trades. She's then sort of looked at dabbling in things like crypto, also quite unsuccessfully. And again, it's important to understand that while she's lost money on those investments, the people that have funded those losses are the investors.
The simple fact that it was stolen money that Melissa was burning on the markets is something that her husband Anthony still fails to grasp.
Do I personally believe that she stole from everyone? I don't. That's my honest opinion. What I believed happened is that she lost the money trading on the stock market and she was probably trying to desperately make it up.
It's come to light over the course of our investigation that Melissa, wherever she could, tried to avoid paying for things. Her offering a fake bank transfer to cop out of that $50 payment for a group birthday present we mentioned earlier, well, that's nothing compared to the threats and lies that she told to avoid much bigger bills. And Kate, you've uncovered a doozy here.
Oh, Tom, this one is a beauty. So, Christmas Eve 2015, Len Wallace, who runs a high-end audio-visual store, received a furious call from Melissa Caddick complaining that their brand new audio system, which his firm had installed, wasn't working.
As a result, Melissa was refusing to pay the last $12,000 of the $122,000 installation bill. But not only that, Melissa was leaving for Aspen the day after Christmas, and because the audio system wasn't working, she claimed she'd been forced to cancel bookings for people who were renting her house while she was away.
Len Wallace was later stunned when he read the following email from Caddick.
Dear Len, thank you for coming to meet with Anthony and I at Dover Heights. As per previous correspondence, our home is an income-producing asset that we rent out over the lucrative Christmas, New Year and school holiday periods. I had tenants coming into the property on Boxing Day for a 10-day period and tenants arriving on the 6th of January 2016 for a 10-day period. Due to the failure of the hardware installed at our property by Len Wallace Audio, both of these tenancies needed to be cancelled. I reimbursed the two tenants a total sum of $65,000. I have attached for your reference tax invoices, tax receipts, bank transaction credit and debit records. You will note for confidentiality purposes, I have had to omit the client's private details. Please confirm that $65,000 will be reimbursed within 14 business days. I trust this matter can be dealt with in a timely and efficient manner. Kind regards, Melissa Caddick.
This is so outrageous. She has forged 2 rental agreements purporting to show that one person had rented her house out for 10 days for $40,000, and once they'd gone, a second tenant had also rented it for 10 days, this time for $30,000.
Hate to be a stickler, Kate, but that actually adds up to $70,000, not $65,000, as Melissa claimed, but I guess we've established by now she wasn't much chop at mathematics. Either way, they are farcical sums of money.
I mean, absolutely ludicrous. And Tom, the awful thing about this is that the money did actually come into her account, but of course it was from 2 of her unfortunate investors. And Melissa simply wrote their names into the fake rental agreements. I mean, it's a double whammy here. She was stealing money from investors and then using that money to try to perpetrate another fraud.
I also just can't believe the height of her line in that email, that she omitted the client's details for privacy reasons. What a load of shit.
Oh, Tom.
I'm sorry, it's taken me 10 episodes to swear, but this has just done my head in here. I mean, she knew, plain and simple, Melissa, that if Len ever called these people to verify the rentals, her lie would be exposed. So she doesn't care. She's not protecting their privacy. She's protecting her own lies.
Oh, I know. And Tom, Nicole, who worked for Melissa, confirmed she never rented out that house. She didn't even like strangers coming in, and the idea she'd be leasing it was just beyond ludicrous, Nicole said. Having received this letter of demand, poor Len had to spend more money. He had to engage lawyers and an insurance investigator to fend off Melissa's ridiculous claims. Here's what the investigator found.
My investigations have identified that it was, unfortunately, Anthony Colletti's direct actions in intervening with the equipment that caused the system to fail in its entirety on 24 December 2015.
The letter also said that Len's firm tried to talk Anthony and Melissa through their problem and offered to send someone around on Christmas Day to manually fix the system, and that they later provided a brand new piece of equipment at no charge to replace what Anthony had broken.
The insurance investigator concluded there was no negligence, no $65,000 payment needed, and basically, we'll see you in court. Len didn't hear from Melissa again, but neither did they get their last payment of $12,000 that she owed.
So good on them for calling Melissa's bluff here, but you do have to wonder how many times she tried this on for size with other people and got away with it. You know, Kate, Christmas seemed to bring out the Grinch in Melissa, because the previous festive season she was at war again, this time with a company called Dream Drives, which gives people the chance to basically show off and big note themselves for a day by tooling around in a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or an Aston Martin. Melissa, after that, fired off a barrage of angry emails demanding a refund, and in the end, she was partially successful.
This brings us to whether or not her investors will get anything back from the sale of Melissa's assets. This is what has been clawed back so far. Her share portfolio sadly wasn't worth the $7 million Colletti had claimed. The shares were sold in March 2022 for $2.7 million.
Now, in her bank accounts, they found $52,400, and the sale of Anthony's beloved Audi R8 and the Mercedes fetched $324,000.
But of course, there'll be more to add to that down the track when the jewellery, all those designer goods and the artwork are sold.
And as we've mentioned earlier, the major assets are the two properties. But whatever they go for, there are still two mortgages totalling nearly $6 million on those properties. And on top of that, they've now got to deal with penalty payments because neither of the mortgages have been paid for more than 18 months.
The apartment in Edgecliff is still the subject of a legal battle with Melissa's parents, Barb and Ted Grimley, who are claiming a life tenancy and a third ownership. Liquidator Bruce Gleeson is disputing this because Melissa spent the $1.1 million her parents gave her on basically jewellery and jets.
But the big ticket item is Melissa's Dover Heights home. The Sydney Morning Herald's property editor, Lucy Mackin, said when Melissa was eyeing off the Wollongong Road mansion back in 2014, it was on the market for $5.8 million.
They dropped the guide to 5.5. It wasn't the best market at the time, especially at this level of the market. Then Melissa came along and paid, obviously 6.2. So she's paid $700,000 over the bottom line. An agent called Brad Pillinger said to me in recent days, it seemed too easy to get the extra money out of her at the time. And in hindsight, we know why.
At the time, Melissa's purchase set a Dover Heights record for the amount of money paid per square metre. Now, with Colletti finally vacating, the prospect of a new listing had real estate agents circling.
Apparently there's no such thing as bad publicity in the eastern suburbs for an agent.
And do you think with a house like this, is it a negative or a positive that it's had a colourful history, shall we say?
There is a stigma attached to it. This was a house bought on the gains of innocent victims. Actually, this is quite an infamous house at the moment.
You might remember that Anthony Colletti said that he thought the house was now worth, ambitiously, $15 to $17 million. This is what Lucy made of that.
That is way overs, what most agents would suggest. And certainly when you look at comparables nearby, they're not getting anything like that.
The other thing Lucy told us was that the market had peaked and it's now on the way down. So unfortunately, if Anthony had moved out of the property when victims wanted him to back in 2021, they would have got a lot more money for the house. But the fact that he dug in his heels and stayed there for so much longer has now potentially cost them millions more.
The fallout from Caddick's fraud has fractured the Grimley family. Some of them will never talk to each other again, said one relative, while another relative refuses to even utter Melissa's name, instead referring to her as that woman.
I think what's really infuriating Caddick's victims is the sense of entitlement being shown by Anthony Coletti, who is, of course, optimistically claiming a stake of everything. And look, there is a degree of public sympathy towards Melissa's parents, Ted and Barb Grimley, who are in their 80s and facing being turfed out of their own apartment. But many of their daughter's victims find themselves in the same sad predicament, and they do think it's quite unfair that the Grimleys, well, they want to take preference over everyone else when it comes to getting their money back.
That reminds me of something Kate Horn, a nurse and disability worker, told us.
Melissa used to say, Mum always says, you must look after number one first. Number one, of course, being yourself.
Kate and her mum Anne are pretty upset about the Grimleys' demands.
I think it's cruel what they're doing because we're all suffering very much. And to think that they have more right than any one of us, it disheartens me.
Well, I do feel quite upset and angered by it, to be perfectly honest. I think they seem to have such a sense of entitlement over everybody else, which I suppose kind of created the problem in the first place. And it is upsetting that they think that their needs surpass ours.
Other people also find it hard to swallow that the Grimleys, and particularly Anthony Coletti, refuse to acknowledge that Melissa was a cold-hearted con artist. Instead, they blame ASIC for all the problems here. This is actually a text message that Barb Grimley sent not long after it was presumed that their daughter was deceased.
We are devastated. We loved Melissa unconditionally. She was our baby, our lovely, kind daughter who protected us during COVID. She had a plan for everything. Now no one will know where anything is. The ASIC's investigator broke her spirit, parading all jewellery, clothes. She left the house and within 5 minutes, gone. No cameras to trace her. Stupid ASIC took it as they didn't know how to download. Even I can do that at my age. They broke her spirit until she was no good for anything.
Barb's frame of mind at that stage seems to very much mirror Anthony Coletti's take on matters, and this is what upsets Melissa's victims. Apparently, it's everyone's fault except Melissa's. And they feel her husband and parents have shown, really very little sympathy to Melissa's victims who have lost tens of millions of dollars because of her evil deeds.
For Kate Horn, Melissa's oldest friend from preschool days, the revelation that Melissa had ripped off so many people she supposedly cared about is still just mind-blowing. In particular, she thinks back to one moment a few months before Melissa disappeared. It was Kate's 50th birthday party, and because of COVID, it was only going to be a small family affair. But Melissa insisted on inviting herself anyway.
She said, what are you doing for your birthday? I told her, and she said, but I'm family, I have to come. I know all of your family. I really want to come and be there, which she did, and she was quite, she certainly made her presence felt. She was quite gregarious. And upon reflection, every single person at that function was being either indirectly or directly affected by her, and she must have known. She knew. My mind just boggles how she could function.
So Melissa was at that party, working the room, schmoozing, faking sincerity, knowing all along that she had stolen at least $10 million from the guests at that event.
And Tom, one thing that's come to light is what Melissa was wearing at the party. It was a dress which featured rather garish patterns of enormous jewels. And Kate Horn's daughter was stunned to discover that this over-the-top dress cost $2,500.
She's 24, loves labels and, is interested in all of that sort of stuff. Noticed that it had a Dolce & Gabbana logo on it and just went home and Googled it. And it really wasn't a very attractive dress, ironically enough. And then when she found out how much it was worth, we just had a little bit of a giggle, at the time.
Of course, they had no idea at the time that the Dolce & Gabbana dress, along with so many other luxury labels, had all been bought using their family's hard-earned money.
And Tom, when Coletti showed Channel 7 through his house, they paused at Melissa's empty wardrobe, and he had a bit of a whinge about all her fancy labels being seized during the raid. Tom, all except one. There was the Dolce & Gabbana dress she'd worn to Kate's party, still hanging alone in the wardrobe.
Even ASIC thought it was too tasteless to touch. Look, the effect of Caddick's betrayal is best expressed by Kate Horn's mum, Anne, who's known Melissa and her family, well, pretty much since day dot.
And being Kate's best friend, it's the last thing, but the treachery behind it all is just unbearable.
Anne has lived a modest life, and she and her late husband had saved carefully for their old age. To then suddenly discover you are penniless, and so are your children, who've also worked so hard.
I feel guilty too, because that was money that my husband and I had worked really hard for, that it was an inheritance that was meant for me, not just me, but for the family when I'm not here anymore. I did get an inheritance from my mum and dad. That was all taken, everything.
It's taken away the joy in Anne's life, and she is now constantly worried.
Well, it's there all the time. It's sitting at the back of my mind every minute. Everything you do, you think, can I be affording this, or should I be doing this? It's there all the time. Even grocery shopping, I think before I buy clothes, oh no, I won't have a wine tonight, thank you. I know, I understand a lot of people are in the same boat, don't get me wrong, I'm not whinging about it, but my life has changed completely.
Now, Kate, I think it's fair to say that we've both been a little bit overwhelmed by just how many people have taken an interest in this podcast.
Yes, and I must confess, when we bumped into each other in the work cafe one day and said we should do a podcast, I just never imagined what a juggernaut this would become.
And look, we've got to say a huge thank you to everyone who has listened and subscribed, and also a big thanks to all those people who've sent us their little tip-offs along the way, and so many questions as well.
We thought it would be a good idea before we sign off just to address a few of the most common queries we receive. Now, one of them is about what on earth the auditors and accountants were doing when Melissa Caddick was diddling the numbers.
Yeah, we addressed a lot of this earlier on in the episode, but Kate, it's also worth mentioning here that the auditors, look, they may yet be facing a class action from Melissa's victims.
Because of the claims they have made over Melissa's assets, Barb and Ted Grimley and Anthony Coletti may find themselves in the uncomfortable situation of having to justify those claims during a public grilling by the liquidators.
Ooh, talk about star witnesses.
And an email from Jenny has summed up another popular question. Why did ASIC just leave her at home following the raid? Is this the process? Did they not think she might escape/disappear even without her passport? It seems so naive to me that they don't take her somewhere to be held until the hearing.
Well, I think what you have to keep in mind is that once the raid was completed, Melissa still hadn't, at that stage, been slapped with any criminal charges. Yes, she had been told to appear in court and the process would flow on from there. But you can't just lock up every person you suspect of a crime in Australia, otherwise we'd need prisons the size of the MCG and the capacity to match them too. The police clearly thought, yes, she could be a flight risk. That's why they took her passport away. But they obviously felt comfortable enough that she would be turning up for court a few days later. I mean, the reality is that people facing criminal charges don't normally just vanish into thin air.
And Tom, the main reason for the raid was to gather more evidence to build a criminal case against Melissa. And having sifted through all the material they seized during the raid, you might recall that an arrest warrant was issued for Melissa. But several days later, her foot was found and the criminal action was dropped because she was presumed to be dead.
And that brings us to far and away the most common question we've received.
And no prizes for guessing, it relates to Anthony Coletti. Specifically, so many of you smelled a rat when Anthony said this on Channel 7.
ASIC took all the files, all the receipts, everything like that. So really, I just feel like she had no foot to stand on.
Hordes of people got in touch to query whether this was some sort of Freudian slip or perhaps Anthony was subtly taunting the authorities that the plan all along was for Melissa to end up without a foot.
Tom, let's be honest, it was a very unfortunate choice of words from Anthony, but it was said after her foot was found, and it wasn't a premonition of what eventually happened. So I can only assume that it was just a slip of the tongue, a mistake. But the obsession that seems to have stemmed from this one sentence has been quite simply astounding. And it also goes to show just how invested people are in every single detail of this bizarre case.
The final word in this series doesn't go to us. We thought it'd be fitting to focus on the people who really do deserve the most attention, and that's Melissa Caddick's victims. We'll come to that in just one moment. But Kate, what a story this has been. And the thing is, there are still many more strange twists and turns to come yet.
Yes, there's still a coronial inquest to be heard. There's the sale of the properties as the liquidators continue their efforts to get money back for Melissa Caddick's victims. And of course, Anthony Coletti still needs to go to court to fight that apprehended violence order that the police have applied for.
Kate and I will return to update you on what happens next in this crazy case. But for now, Kate, it has been an absolute joy working with you. And we really do have to give a big shout out as well to our team behind the scenes, particularly Dave McMillan, Michael Evans, Tracy Hannaford and Julia Carcatzel.
Yes, Tom, for all the craziness of the Caddick story, it sometimes can be easy to be distracted by her outrageous lifestyle and her baffling toy boy. But the friends and family of Melissa who trusted her implicitly are the people who have suffered the most. And I think her best friend, Kate Horn, summed it up best.
I was working every Friday, Saturday and Sunday night, really night shifts, 10-hour nights. I had really very little social life because I was so busy working and striving because they were the best paying shifts really, so I was able to earn reasonable money and be available for my children and be able to just put a little bit aside. And it was, night shift is so hard on your body and every aspect. It infiltrated, it was difficult. But I just thought, well, that's for my future. To think that I was doing that. And she knew, and she let me. And she continued to be deceitful as well as just heartbreaking.
This comment from Kate really resonated with me. She said if Melissa had suffered a brain snap and had stolen the money, Kate could almost cope with that. But it's remembering the number of times Melissa looked her in the eye as Kate thanked her for making such a big difference to her life. And Melissa would simply smile and shrug off Kate's heartfelt gratitude.
It was chilling that she would accept that praise, knowing what she was doing. And she would look me in the eye and just say, oh, that's just what I do.
If you have found any of the content of today's episode troubling, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14.
Liar Liar is a co-production of the Sydney Morning Herald and 60 Minutes.
It was written and presented by Kate McClymont and Tom Steinford.
Michael Evans is the Sydney Morning Herald's investigations editor and the series' supervising producer.
This episode was produced and edited by David McMillan with Tracy Hannaford for 60 Minutes.
Kirsty Thompson is the executive producer of 60 Minutes.
For more of Australia's best investigative journalism, subscribe to the Sydney Morning Herald by visiting smh.com.au and watch 60 Minutes on 9 or 9 Now every Sunday.
If you know more about Melissa Caddick's disappearance, please contact the team by emailing liarliarpodcast@smh.com.au.
A portion of Anthony Coletti's audio in this episode is from Spotlight, The Vanishing, and is used courtesy of the 7 Network.
Some names and voices have been changed in this series to protect the identity of victims.